This is getting ridiculous. The Martin Necas trade talks are getting even crazier as Dave Pagnotta of the fourth period reveals that Montreal is one of the teams still in the sweepstakes, but Carolina wants a hockey trade, and a mock trade was revealed by a writer at Sportsnet that sees Kent Hughes giving up 4 prospects, including Owen Beck. But we also have a note on Owen Beck showing he might just be a better scorer than we ever thought. All of that coming up on this episode of Habs Digest. Without further ado, Jesse, we got to start with Owen Beck. Now, Owen Beck, he's a fan favorite prospect. He had a fantastic year with the Saginaw Spirit, and an article was posted by Eric Engels, a Habs insider for Sportsnet. Really, it's a fantastic article. Go check it out. It's in the description. Please go look at it. There's a lot more than we're going to cover here. But Jesse, he did a bit of a deep dive and interviewed the Saginaw Spirit coach about Owen Beck, and I wanted to highlight some of the things that they said. So we're going to bring this up here. I know we're getting a guy who is a pure scorer. Those were the first words out of Chris Lazary's mouth when asked about Beck. I do think he can push up into that 2C role in the NHL, but if his worst case is a third center, I don't see any issue with that. You need those guys to win, but I do think he can be more than that. So to me, in the NHL, winning puck battles, being strong on the puck is huge. He excels at those things. He does those things. He's strong. He supports the puck well as a center. He's good on both sides of it, and he can score. Now, when you think of Owen Beck, Jesse, you don't immediately think of score. You think a fantastic two-way guy with a bit of upside. And while he did have a great year in Saginaw, it's kind of crazy to see the praise he's getting for his offensive talent, something that he was really able to showcase in his second half of the year in the OHL this year.
Yeah, Owen Beck getting big praise from a coach that just won the Memorial Cup as well. So it's definitely got to count for something, and Owen Beck is a player that I'm really rooting for, and I think he's going to do really well at the next level. And just look at what he's accomplished on his way getting there, right? Like, first he wins like the OHL title with the Peterborough Petes. He's able to win gold at the World Juniors. He's then able, in his last year in junior, to win the Memorial Cup. And not just that, be the MVP, be a driver on offense, right? Like, that's why this guy is getting the praise, right? So he's a winner. He thinks the game so well, Josh. Like, when you hear this guy like dissecting a play, like him just talking about hockey, he understands it so well, right? So when we're talking about like, could his potential possibly be better than that of just a 3C? I think absolutely so. Just the fact is how he'll be able to read plays. This really fits in so well with Martin St. Louis' system. And Josh, like, doesn't it kind of make sense, right? Like, we're thinking if Owen Beck, like, if he makes this team out of camp, whenever he does make this team, we're thinking he's starting right away as a 3C for this team. So if that's where he's starting, just making the team, you got to think that leaves the potential for him to potentially, I know it sounds crazy, but to maybe make the top 6 in the future for the Habs.
I mean, look, I'm going to try and keep myself a bit grounded because I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I do think that a hockey IQ like he has, Jesse, is not as common as people make it out to be. And a hockey IQ combined with an incredible work ethic can get you very far. I haven't seen enough yet against pros to know what I think Owen Beck is going to turn into. But I do know his hockey IQ is incredible. I do see him at least being a consistent bottom 6 player for the Montreal Canadiens. And that is fantastic if you can get that out of where he was picked in the draft in the 30s, right? It's unbelievable to get that out of a pick that low. But to hear like that offensive upside and that praise and how he thinks the game when you watch him, like you just see a guy who knows how to get to the right spots, who knows how to win faceoffs, how to play defense, but also has a knack for offense. It's like, those are the skills that are incredibly translatable. Let us know down below. Do you think Owen Beck has 2C upside? Do you see him ever getting into that top 6 ahead of someone like a Kirby Dach? It's kind of insane to talk about, but the praise is out there. I guess we're just going to have to see this year. But Jesse, speaking of this year and some changes we're going to see, my gosh, this is going to be a big segment of this video, everyone. So buckle up. We got to start with this Martin Necas talk. I know it's tired. It's tired. We talked about it so much, but I promise you're going to be interested in what we have to say here. So Dave Pagnotta of the fourth period has been kind of tuned into this situation a little bit, and he's been talking about the whole Necas saga. And he said recently, just yesterday, as the Hurricanes carry out trade talks with teams about Martin Necas, the word is Carolina is looking to complete a hockey trade, not a deal strictly for future assets. Team like Nashville, Seattle, and Montreal among those teams still believed to be in the mix. Now, before we get into this mock trade by Ryan Dixon of Sportsnet, I wanted to talk about this first. When you hear hockey trade from the Carolina Hurricanes and you hear, the Montreal Canadiens involved, to me, that tells me someone like a Mike Matheson is probably involved, because if you hear team doesn't want futures, that's kind of mostly what Montreal has to offer. We'll get into the mock trade in a second, but just a quick thought on maybe Matheson for Necas. Is that a swap you think the Habs are ready to do, especially if the Zeev Boyum talk is maybe picking up? Like, maybe he's the pick if you trade Matheson out. I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that before we dive into one of the most wild trades I've seen this offseason?
Right. Well, the question is like, which one of our decor would be going the other way if this trade was to happen? It seems obvious the only direction of how that kind of makes sense for the Montreal Canadiens. This is a tough one, right? We've been asked, do we think we should trade Matheson for like that 10th overall, which might be available? Necas, right? Like it's a tough ask because this decor is so young. Matheson had a career year, right? But I don't know. It's like at a certain point, you do need to make that play for the top 6. I don't know if I'm fully convinced that Necas is that player, but man, does he ever check a lot of those boxes, right? And part of me is telling me, you know what? And probably can't use as well as you can't always just wait for that perfect type of player. You can't always wait. You got to get into the game and start trying to be a little bit more competitive at some point. That would be a tough one, but you know what? You have to really strongly consider it if you're the Habs.
Well, that's very true, and I think like I love Matheson. He's from Quebec. Like he could be on this team for a long time, and I wouldn't be upset. But he clearly fits the timeline and the contract of a contending team way better. Like he's making not that much money relative to production, especially with the cap going up. And he just came off a career year. He's like 30, so it's like it kind of works out. But there's a world where the Habs don't have to give him up. And I want to get into this mock trade done by Ryan Dixon of Sportsnet. Also going to link this down below. And it's a lot. And I want to start with what he said Montreal would be giving up. Actually, let me make this a bit bigger. So he basically says Anderson going out, nothing retained, I believe. Justin Barron, Jaden Struble, and Owen Beck all going to Winnipeg. Jordan Harris and the 26th pick in the draft going to Carolina. And the Habs get Martin Necas. So you get rid of Anderson, Barron, Harris, Struble, Beck, and a first. And you get Necas. And you're like, well, why would Carolina do this? Well, that's because this is a 3-way trade where the Carolina Hurricanes are actually landing Nick Ehlers, another guy in the trade block. Winnipeg bolsters some of their young players. I don't know if that's something, with the record room Gordy talk, I don't know about this. But they get Beck, they get Struble, who's already ready to contribute, and Barron as well, at least to a little bit on defense. Barron rejoins his brother. And they get a guy in Josh Anderson who is ready to contribute now, though he's definitely not at a very high trade value, and a second. And finally, the Hurricanes ship out Necas and a second-round pick. They bring in Jordan Harris, an established NHL defenseman, and Nick Ehlers to replace that gap, and they get a 26th pick in the draft. It's maybe value-wise not the craziest thing, Jesse, but just trying to dissect this all is unbelievable. The first reaction is the Habs are giving up an unbelievable amount of assets. But like we said, you got to give to get. And in this situation where Montreal's in a position to overpay for a great player, and I know you say maybe an offer sheet, you only have to give up a first, second, and a third for Necas. But if you wait for that, you're risking his rights being traded to another team before that. This is a situation where the Habs have to give up a lot, but nothing that really moves the needle of their current NHL team, I know Beck could be there, to get a guy like Necas. What are your thoughts on this, Jesse? It's almost impossible to dissect all at once.
Well, it's wild to see circling back that we're now maybe one of the final 3 teams. Seems like we kind of got out of that race, but seems like we're right back in, right in the thick of it, right? I know like that trade, everything except putting in that first round pick for me almost makes it a little bit too rich. We're giving a lot, but then throwing in that first, I don't know. I kind of like that pick. Maybe seems like a little bit too much. But honestly, like these are the type of moves we need to look at. I think the Habs really need quality over quantity right now. And this is a trade where for sure we're trading a lot. Owen Beck, it really hurts losing him, but we're not giving up any of our top defensive prospects. Probably some guys that could really use a fresh start that might be appealing at the same time to Winnipeg, right? And at the same time, like, not only are we kind of cashing in on the, quality versus quantity thing, but we're just dealing also two birds with one stone of just the logjam that we have in defense, which almost inevitably you hope almost for a trade like this without kind of giving a first. I hope for Hughes to kind of negotiate a little bit on that part to make this trade sort of happen. You kind of almost are hoping that something along these lines comes around if you're the Habs, because I really think it's time where we have such a plethora of picks, but we really need to start getting those star type players. And this is an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, it's again, like I said, it's a lot to break down. The way I kind of look at it too is that if you're Carolina or Winnipeg, these guys, both guys on the trade block, again, they just a restricted free agent, and you're getting like a decent haul in return for these two guys if you're both of those teams. Now, the immediate thing that you'd hear from Winnipeg is like they're looking to bolster their roster. They're not looking to get stuff for the future. Owen Beck could be a contributor, but Winnipeg's kind of hesitant, as we've seen with the whole McGroarty situation, to play young guys. So Owen Beck probably wouldn't play with them right away. And then they're adding like Barron and Struble, who are both NHL capable guys, but they'd probably be bottom pairing, maybe second pairing, but probably not. Barron with the offensive potential to maybe move into the top 4, and they get a second round pick. It's like, objectively, that's pretty good value for Ehlers, but I think Winnipeg's the team out of all this that would say no just because they're not getting stuff right now. But if I'm Montreal, like you said, Jesse, I know everyone's going to hype up Owen Beck and all these guys in this trade, but like, let's be honest, how many of those guys are going to eventually have an NHL impact at the level that Necas could be if all things work out? I think Owen Beck's the only one on that list of guys that's traded that you're like, he could legit be a middle 6 guy for a long time, and there's potential that Necas kind of ends up being a middle 6 guy as well. So that's kind of where that kind of gap is. The 26th pick in the draft, though, Jesse, historically has not landed a whole lot of unbelievable NHL talent. I know this draft is fairly deep. There's some good talent, but I don't know. I think, like you said, at some point you have to risk something to get something. And I know not everyone's sold on Necas, but and I know this could look like a trade that down the line you regret. Like, look at all the defensemen that we traded that are doing so good elsewhere, and Necas never really did it for us. I don't know. I feel like eventually it's a risk you got to take, but maybe I'm crazy.
No, I think at a certain point, you need to try and upgrade your top 6. That's the ultimate priority for the Montreal Canadiens. Yeah. And if you need to kind of subtract from your bottom 6 and, kind of your fringe kind of defenseman, right, which we don't even really have a full spot, for, I would say that by the day, Montreal is losing leverage on that. We're going to need to deal defensemen more than teams has kind of come praying, knowing that we need to do something, training camps coming, right? Like Kent, I think, needs to be proactive. He needs to be picking up the phone call and making these types of moves right now. I just expect Kent, that he can do maybe just a little bit better than what we're seeing here, but the same overall idea I think works.
Yeah, it's a lot. Not to mention though, they're getting rid of Anderson's contract, and you'd immediately basically replace that with Necas, which is actually kind of a big plus. And again, it's a reason I don't think Winnipeg would do this, because Anderson I don't think fits what they want. I mean, he's in theory a nice middle 6 or top 6 guy. In practice, not necessarily. But what do you guys think? It's an insane trade. We could talk about this for hours. Maybe we'll talk about this in the live stream tomorrow if you guys want to tune in. But for now, that'll do it for this episode of Habs Digest. Happy draft week. Thank you for tuning in at the start of the week. We'll have daily content. We'll be live during the draft. We'll have videos before and after. A ton of stuff coming this week. So subscribe if you haven't already, because you won't want to miss a thing. I'm Josh Gosse, my co-host, Jesse Poirier. We'll catch you in the next one.